Mortgage Solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, YCAR. Appreciate being able to be here. To piggyback on Steve a little bit, one of the things that our underwriters say is if you write farm-like property, you said farm. So it's better to say acreage without buildings than farm. So keep that in mind as you're writing your listings too, is if you're trying to sell this as a farm, call it a farm. If you're trying to sell this as a residential property that has other options, just kind of temper the words that you use. Anyway, I am with Mortgage Solutions Financial. We are a direct lender with all of the agency products. We have very, very, very few overlays, so we're often able to do loans that others aren't. There's a flyer on your table that talks a little bit about our guidelines. One of the things that we do have that differentiates us some is that we do have a true hobby farm product that's not afraid of Schedule F income or afraid of acreage. And we're also a direct lender with Farmer Mac, which allows us to do large acreage. We also, like First Fed, could do that single wide with acreage with a spring. We just wouldn't give any value to the pre-76 manufactured home. But today I am here to talk about financing for borrowers coming out of bankruptcy. Some quick statistics. Between January of 2014 and January of 2018, there were over 24,000 potential home buyers who had come out of a Chapter 7 bankruptcy in the state of Oregon. What percentage of that's in Yamhill County, I'm not real sure, but still that's a fairly significant amount of people that are able to purchase a home or might be able to purchase a home that aren't aware that they could. And then over 1,400 that were in Chapter 13 in the repayment agreement between January of 2015 and January of 2017. And the only reason I'm bringing those dates up is that those are really the timelines that borrowers are now eligible for financing. That's not counting any of the borrowers that would be pre those dates, that would already be eligible. Some guidelines or caveats, I guess, that I want to put out. Bankruptcies are serious credit events. It's not one of those things that, oh, we did it, we met the time frames, and now we're able to buy a house. Underwriters look very seriously at bankruptcies. You've shown that you've got bad credit or had bad credit. Was it because of character or was it because of life events? Life events happens to everybody. Character, not necessarily so much. Back in the subprime days, I figured that I could get anybody approved unless they had collections from Finger Hut and Blockbuster. Those were the two that really scared me because that showed character. Everybody else, you know, again, life happens. So some of the things that we really want to see is reestablishment of good credit, generally 12 months of on-time payments with no derogatory marks post-bankruptcy. Again, sometimes you can get past those derogatories if there's a good reason. I had one on a VA that, two different situations, both had bankruptcies. One had major medical events post-bankruptcy. We were able to get that approved. Another one, I wasn't able to get approved because he had 5 or 6 separate instances of missing payments, medical things, various different things that showed character flaws as opposed to, I shouldn't even say character flaws, he was really a nice guy, volunteered. He just didn't take his finances as seriously as the other person did. Foreclosures or short sales have their own timelines unless the debt is discharged in the bankruptcy. So often what will happen, especially with a Chapter 7, is they might throw the home into the bankruptcy. So the debt's discharged, but then after the bankruptcy is taken care of, then the house goes through foreclosure. And so those timelines could be different. Sometimes it's not an issue, sometimes it is. It all depends on the circumstances. The ones I hate to see are, well, we tried to hang on to the house because we were going to modify it. So we discharged everything except the home. Then the modifying company said, well, you need to miss at least 3 or 4 months worth of payments so we can get the modification through. Now they're 90 to 120 days late on a home that wasn't part of the bankruptcy. So then they go through foreclosure on that, and that's a whole separate credit effect. And they're tough, but people make decisions based on the information that they have, and it's not always great information. Another guideline, anything less than the standard waiting period will most likely result in a refer or require a manual downgrade. Some lenders do these, some lenders don't. Generally speaking, if we get an approved eligible, we think that we've got a good deal. Got to read down into the guidelines, and it'll say, it'll give qualifying statements. Sometimes it'll say that there's evidence of a bankruptcy, need to confirm that it meets all of the guidelines. So we have an approved eligible, but there's a caveat down here that says maybe you don't. So it's not as simple as just saying, hey, we've got an approval, let's move forward. And often the online lenders will just look at that, we got an approval, and give you the go-ahead to move forward. But there's a ticking time bomb. Often there can be residual items on a credit report that need to be cleaned up. Very, very, very common that there will be items showing on the credit report that have been discharged in the bankruptcy, but they're still showing on the report, either with a balance or possibly even showing that the collection agency is trying to get them. Or, God forbid, the collection agency sold the debt to somebody else who doesn't realize it was discharged. Those are always fun ones. Disputes are often on there, because what people will do is they go through bankruptcy, they then try to clean up their credit. Generally, the credit repair companies will dispute everything. The problem with disputes, and this is fairly new, but the problem with disputes is those are not counted in the credit score. So someone could have a 640, think that they're in great shape to buy a home. Once we remove the disputes, now they might be down to a 540. That completely changes the loan situation. At that point, they might no longer have a loan. Another one that I found recently, I do a lot of Chapter 13 restructures or buyouts, and if the mortgage is part of the Chapter 13, it won't even report on the credit report. And so then we've got to get a mortgage rating. And if the mortgage is included in the Chapter 13, then they've made their payments, but often they will exclude that and make the payments on their own. Hopefully they've made those payments. If not, again, it changes everything. So looking at the two main types of bankruptcies that we deal with as lenders, Chapter 7, which is the debt is discharged. So they go through, we look at everything on there, and everything's, we have to line things up and make sure what's been discharged. The timelines that we look at for a conventional 4 years is considered standard. 2 years with extenuating circumstances. And these extenuating circumstances are non-reoccurring, including medical, job loss, a new one that I wasn't aware of, divorce is considered an extenuating circumstance. Every place I've ever worked except Mortgage Solutions viewed that divorce was in and of itself not an extenuating circumstance. But Fannie Mae's guidelines say that it is, and I've confirmed this with Fannie Mae. So if you got someone who that is their extenuating circumstance, we need the divorce decree, we look through all of that. FHA, 2 years is standard, 1 year with, and actually I'm going to include FHA, VA, and USDA in the same because they're basically the same. 2 years, well, USDA is 3 years. So FHA and VA, 2 years is the standard waiting period. 1 year with extenuating circumstances, non-recurring medical, job loss. However, FHA, VA do say that divorce is not an extenuating circumstance, so that is not acceptable. There are non-QM products, very much like the subprime, that they will do 1 day out of bankruptcy. But just because they're 1 day out doesn't mean it's guaranteed. Chapter 13, the debt is structured into a repayment plan. And that's where they've taken responsibility. They want to make the payments. Conventional discharge 2 years because they've already spent time in the repayment. If it's dismissed, it's 4 years. 2 years with extenuating circumstances that we already talked about. They will not allow a loan in the repayment period. FHA, VA, and USDA will allow loans to be done in the repayment agreement. The most important, Crystal had indicated my time's about up, so I'm going to skip a little bit here. The main thing I want you to be aware of or to think about with people who are talking about bankruptcy or are in bankruptcy, the best advice that you can give them is to make all of your payments on time. If they're in a Chapter 13, I've got to have 12 months of payments, and they cannot have missed a single one of their Chapter 13 payments. If they miss one, it's a dead deal. They've got to wait until they're out of their Chapter 13. The trustee has to give permission, documentation that the bankruptcy was isolated and won't happen again. So I don't want you to be afraid of clients with bankruptcies. I just want you to, your antennas to go up a little bit and realize that these are people that are going to take a little extra time. Get them in front of your lender as early as possible so that we can get a pre-approval. It's not just as simple as running it through the automated system, yep, we're good to go. Often what we're going to need to do is to gather all of the documentation, send it into an underwriter, and make sure that we're good. Okay, thanks a lot.